Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the associate publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. The Arizona Capital Times, of course, covers state government. A lot of people describe us as non-ideological, non-partisan, independent newspaper. I kind of refer to ourselves as your equal harassment newspaper. And if you don't have a subscription, let me know and I'll get you squared away. We will be talking about K-12 innovation this morning. This pandemic has given us the opportunity to explore ways in which we deliver education, but also perhaps to try and rethink the way we educate our kids. At this point, I want to thank our sponsor, Yes Every Kid, for engaging with us this way. Yes Every Kid is a group committed to uniting with education stakeholders, community leaders, and families to unleash the extraordinary potential of every student. The group stands for families, educators, and Americans who desire a K-12 education system where every student receives an excellent individualized education alongside teachers who deserve more freedom and autonomy in the classroom. The group supports education policies that respect the dignity of every student, foster a diversity of approaches, and is open to the free flow of ideas and innovation. Thank you again, Yes Every Kid. We have a distinguished panel this morning. Joining us are Becky Hill. Ms. Hill is the regional director for Yes Every Kid. She had cut her teeth on public policy as an intern at the Arizona House of Representatives and as a research staffer back in the 1990s. She served as the director of state and congressional affairs for the Arizona State Superintendent of Public Instruction and eventually joined Governor Janet Napolitano's staff, where she served as the education policy advisor to the administration. After a decade of policy development and advocacy for elected officials of both parties, Ms. Hill started Hill Advocacy in 2007. Ms. Hill's primary area of expertise is education policy, education finance, public finance, and regulatory change. And after joining Yes Every Kid in 2019, Ms. Hill began to travel the Western United States to hear from elected community and advocacy leaders on the pivot from education reform to educational transformation and how we can design an educational environment that respects the needs and interests of every single child. Becky, thank you for joining us. Also joining us is Janelle Wood. Ms. Wood is the founder of the Black Mothers Forum, a nonprofit organization of Black mothers focused on ending violence in the Black community, dismantling the school to prison pipeline, and restoring the strength, dignity, and hope of the Black community. She served as a chief of staff for a council member back in the last decade, and she was one of the City of Phoenix 2019 MLK Jr. Living the Dream awardees. She serves on the City of Phoenix, she serves on Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego's ad hoc committee on policing, the Arizona Department of Education School Safety Task Force, the Arizona Department of Education's Equity and Inclusion Council, and the City of Phoenix Police Department's use of force task force and disciplinary review board. Janelle, thank you for joining us this morning. Also joining us is Stephanie Parra. Ms. Parra is the executive director for Arizona for Latino Leaders in Education, or All in Education. The group aims to ensure that the communities most affected by education inequities are the ones making decisions for all children. Ms. Parra is an educator committed to improving public schools in Arizona. She was born in Yuma. She is a first-generation American citizen and is a product of Arizona Public Schools. She holds 2 bachelors in justice studies and psychology and a master's in higher and post-secondary education. She currently serves as the governing board president of the Phoenix Union High School, and she represents Ward 3. Stephanie, thank you for joining us. And finally, also joining us is Emily Ann Gullickson. She's the founder and executive director of Great Leaders Strong Schools. Previously, she served as the chief executive officer at the Arizona Chamber Foundation and executive director for the A for Arizona initiative, in which she played a leading role in growing the 2-person research shop into a thriving foundation with 3 major initiatives, and using her experience as an educator, legal advocate, and policy leader. Ms. Gullickson is devoted to changing the narrative of what's possible for students in Arizona and the nation. Thank you again for joining us. So, as I mentioned earlier, the school lockdown during the spring and today's prolonged pandemic magnified school problems that we were kind of limping through for decades. And I'm wondering if we can just go around the table, if you will, and what I want to ask you is, what have we learned from the transition to online, digital, or at-home learning in the spring? Let me start with Becky.
Hi, thank you, Luigi. Good morning. When you think that kind of big picture before we go into a lot of the specifics about what we've learned, if you think back to March, hundreds of thousands of kids left campus for spring break and they haven't been back. And when we started thinking about those early days of this massive change, the initial reactions from educators and policymakers at both the federal and local level were surprisingly common. Like there was immediate consensus about what we needed to do to be able to serve kids in this environment. And so what we learned in that moment was how much agreement there is about the things in education that have to change. Everyone almost immediately agreed we need to roll back seat time. Everyone almost immediately agreed we need to focus on mastery, right? Instead of just pacing along the same way for every kid. We learned that we have some extremely outdated policies about digital learning. For example, in Arizona, there's this long approval process. You have to pay a $6,000 fee to be able to offer an online class in the digital age. So there's a lot that we needed to unravel that wasn't working in education. And there was almost immediate consensus that has been sustained around these three areas. The other thing that was really striking was that the physical change in standardized education, right? Not just the education policies, but the physical unraveling, where in a blink of an eye, all of these kids who are on 300, 500, 2,500 student campuses have dispersed, right, into their homes and into their communities. And they're learning in their communities and in their homes. And that has created an environment where almost immediately, like we knew every student needed individualized attention, but the need for it became so necessary and extremely urgent. And, before a single student may have become a little invisible in a large class or on a large campus, but when they're on their own at home, their individual needs really started to become harder to ignore. And so all these promising, mostly positive changes are either underway for the first time or being more broadly applied. And it's really just a seismic shift in how and where we're educating our kids.
Thank you, Becky. Let me go to Emily Ann. Emily Ann, you've been watching the school system in Arizona for a number of years. And as Becky noted, there were many changes that we had to do during the lockdown. And we saw a lot of problems, and we kind of have to solve those problems immediately. And I wonder from your end, in terms of serving the schools and what changes might have become permanent. I wonder what you're seeing on the ground.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's important to point out is that we in Arizona are in a better spot than a lot of other states. We already had embraced school choice and recognized that the one-size-fits-all model did not work. We've done a lot of reform work over the last 5 years on teacher certification, more flexibilities for modifying teacher roles in the classroom, leveraging community training programs to meet needs. We have done a lot of work on school facilities over the last 5 years and adaptable spaces and flexible spaces. And I think the better spot because we have this spirit amongst our leaders and teachers of creativity and agility. Arizona has long led the K-12 arena with innovation. And so for me, it was not surprising to see the leadership driving with results and data, focused on looking at how practices were implementing students. One of my other hats is I'm also the founder and CEO of A for Arizona. So we partner with Arizona's highest performing high poverty schools across the state and really took a lot of lessons from what they were learning on the ground. And it's not to suggest that this was easy by any means, but a lot of the great practices and focus that has been going on over the last few years about redesigning models, upskilling classrooms into 21st century learning had already started before the pandemic. And so it's very exciting how this has scaled across more schools than had originally been looking at modifying the school experience to benefit more kids, because we know that the system has not worked for all kids for a very long time. And so it's great to see the energy now across governing boards, across principals, across classrooms, really hyper-focused on what works a student-centered way.
Nothing like a crisis that compels people to really hone in on problems and not just find solutions, but explore other ways. Janelle, let me ask you, from your end, what have you seen on the ground? And I guess I'm going to ask you particularly with regards to the parents. There were a lot of adjustments that parents have had to do. I can tell you, for example, in my case, I'm working full time, and during the lockdown, I was working full time and homeschooling full time, and it was a real struggle. I can tell you that, and not just with me, but with my kid too. And in a new environment in which the home is supposed to be the place where you play, and suddenly you have to do schoolwork.
Mm-hmm. So thank you, Luigi, and I'm glad to be here. Yes, one of the things that we saw glaringly initially from our parents, especially the Black parents that I work with, was the disconnect between the parent and the school. There was some disconnect. We already knew that, and so a lot of our parents had felt that they weren't being heard. And now we bring it into their home. Now we're bringing everything in, and now they recognize how disconnected they were from their schools. And so many of them struggled with just getting the basic things that they needed done because a lot of them did not really have a relationship or a good relationship with their child's teacher and really did not oftentimes know an administrator in a positive light, but always was called in on some negative things. And so there was a friction in that relationship. And so it was difficult at times for them to get the resources they needed and the answers they needed timely. And so how we got involved is because we had developed relationships with various school districts, we were able to assist and get them the help they needed by contacting the contacts that we had in those particular schools and say, hey, we need you to contact this person. We're working with this person. So our advocacy kicked in a different way. Now we're just trying to get them connected to the services that they needed in order to be educated. Now, unfortunately.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And thank you, Janelle. So I want to stay on that thought. I think what we're hoping for is more engagement, really from the parents. Let me go to Stephanie real quick. Stephanie, where are we at in terms of our preparedness for? Right now, we're already in the middle of the fall classes. What lessons did you learn from the transition in the spring? And what changes have you adopted kind of on a more permanent level? And just give us an update as to, especially in your district, which is a pretty large district.
Yeah, so a couple of things I'll share. I think for us, the biggest lesson learned is how critical a role parents and family and caregivers play in supporting academic achievement and student success. And for a really long time, that has been a barrier for Phoenix Union. Our families are working multiple jobs to keep the lights on and food on the table. And so engagement it tends to be more difficult for our community. And that's really what was exposed at the core of the pandemic, is that in low-income communities and communities of color, there is a massive disconnect between school systems and parents and how they engage to support their kids. And so we turn to a place where now we are relying on parents to be instructional assistants. And some parents were able to transition more effectively than others. Parents who could work from home had a better off situation than parents that had to continue to work as essential workers, et cetera. I think for me, the lesson learned, and one of the things I've been sharing is a real bright spot was in Tucson Unified, where Tucson took the parents in their Mexican American Studies program and created a parent support network. I was on a Zoom call, multiple Zoom calls with parents in this group. They meet every Tuesday night, and they provide tech assistance and ask questions and give each other that support and that resource. And so at Phoenix Union, we're implementing something similar. And in order to scale that, I think we have to think about family engagement differently. How do we involve parents to be part of the solution? Because one of the lessons that we learned, or one of the things I heard in these conversations, is that parents want to help. They don't want their students to fall behind. They want to problem solve with schools. We need to invite them in to help guide us.
Thank you, Stephanie. As I mentioned earlier, this prolonged pandemic has provided the schools, allowed the schools, given the schools the opportunity to really explore ways to not just deliver education, but maybe rethink the way we do schooling, right? And so the whole idea of rethinking schools, I want to go to Emilan real quick and see what are some of the really the most innovative ideas that have been implemented on the ground that you've seen, in the last couple months.
Sure. So we just had the pleasure of receiving a bunch of applications at Arizona for the Expansion and Innovation Fund, and really got to see ways that people are thinking outside the box, new ways of approaching serving exceptional students and students with disabilities, really embracing technology and Wi-Fi expansion outside of their own school systems, including private tutors, leveraging volunteers from the community to help close the gap for students. We've seen exciting proposals that include sort of next-gen technology, robot-like delivery to help make sure that student engagement doubles down this fall. One of my favorite parts has been seeing schools that have just totally redesign their schooling model.
Emily, you were cutting in and out.
In Alhambra.
Emily, you were cutting in and out there for like 2 seconds or so we missed that last part. Can you repeat it?
Sorry about that. One of the exciting parts has been seeing schools that have embraced this time to do total redesigns of their models. Alhambra Elementary School, for example, just launched the Girls Innovation Academy, leveraging a lot of strong community partners and business allies to really rethink school experience and delivery. We've seen huge expansions in smaller learning communities, big spikes in micro schools, and rethinking classroom design and one-on-one student experiences. So lots of exciting work, and that's not just in the suburbs or in the urban core, but also in our rural and remote communities, just really embracing new ways of learning.
So at this point, I want to pause and just remind our audience, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to send them in via the Q&A room or via the chat room, and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of the program. There are a couple ideas that I want to go through and to see if they're feasible, and if they're feasible, how do we exactly implement them? And one of the ideas out there is that what about providing resources directly to families via education grants, stipends, or family directed education accounts to help pay for courses, devices, connectivity, tutoring, and other forms of learning that parents may opt for. Let me go to Becky for that.
Sure, thank you, Luigi. Well, we always think putting parents in as much control, giving them reins for their child's education is important. Stephanie and Janelle have talked a lot about that, and are trying to put systems in place for their parents. And there are a lot of ways we need to do this. There isn't just one way, right? It's more than communication, it's actual control. And resources are the way you provide that control, and resources are the way you provide equity for all these options that we're seeing pop up around Arizona and in our school districts and charter schools and private schools. And two really quick good examples. We know that a lot of schools are reporting to the federal government now, hey, we couldn't spend all of that money that you provided us. And one of the most striking examples of this, there are schools that said we could not spend all of our IDEA money, all of our dollars for special needs students. That money should have been pushed out into the community to parents who have special needs students, who I can guarantee you would have found a speech therapy, an occupational therapy, a physical therapy, or an enrichment experience that their child desperately needed. And so, micro grants or modest investments in families where they can make some of those decisions themselves to have this highly customized, individualized experience for their kid. The other thing I want to mention real quickly is small learning communities. Around Arizona, and I'll just use the public system as an example, parents really want small learning communities, so they're not stuck making this false choice of either their student kind of being at home, doing, you know, online, or being forced to go into a large campus or large classroom experience where they're not sure their child's going to be safe. So they want smaller learning communities. Some school districts have tried to, you know, put this option out there. Parents have approached them about, hey, let's have a partnership. And part of that partnership is providing them the resources to be able to do that. And so, you know, those resources could be the teacher who's employed by the school district, you know, supplies or isolated learning space, or saying, hey, you're already learning at home, continue to learn at home. We'll provide you some of the resources to expand what that learning experience looks like. So if you're talking about empowering parents, you're only going halfway in doing that if you're not giving them access to their child's financial resources for their learning experience. So we feel pretty strongly that that needs to be part of the conversation.
And Stephanie, let me get your thoughts on that one.
Can I respond to that? Because
yeah. Go ahead.
I think absolutely parents need to be involved in their child's education. But vouchers have been proven to be massively inequitable and only benefit affluent white families. I'm listening to a podcast called Nice White Parents right now, and that podcast really highlights how these conversations have created systems ingrained where some families benefit from these concepts, but a massive majority of our families do not benefit. And so our schools continue to be under-resourced. Schools where low-income families and families of color like Phoenix Union go to are resources taken out of our schools to support, you know, the suburbs, for example, so that families that can have choice and options can support their kids. And so we have to be honest about how policies impact you know, our low-income communities and families of color. And so I want us to make sure that we are making decisions. I don't know why I'm appearing over here, but how we make policy choices, because over the years, this podcast has highlighted years of bad policy decisions that have ultimately resulted in families of color, continuing to be under-resourced and not have access to high-quality learning environments. So
go ahead, Becky. Yep.
We want to make sure.
No, this is a great conversation, right? This is the conversation we need to have. And all of us who do this work are right to think about how do these policies impact our most vulnerable families. But when you say those who don't have access to options or to resources for their kids, we could only make the educational environment equitable by continuing to not give them access to their own resources. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. And the data is not, let's talk about Arizona. We know that the way lines are drawn for school district boundaries are based on segregational practices. And so the system as it's currently designed is not equitable. And we know that parents and students who are able to access the private school tax credit, it's only for low income students, right? And actually the example I gave was not for resources outside of the public school system. That's how sensitive we all are about this conversation. It was about giving parents inside of the public school system access to resources that they need inside the public school system. So where this school district or school districts were not able to spend those IDA dollars during the pandemic, they could have granted those dollars out to their families who are part of the public school system and who will remain part of the public school system. So I think we need to think it's not an either or choice.
Let me step in for a second, because I want to flesh out what Becky said. Becky, so is it because of the statute that the schools are not able to grant, IDA dollars to families? Is there like a regulatory framework that prevents that from happening?
Well, yes, but my point was, think about the environments where there is an opportunity to state at families, what do you need right now? Here are some dollars to go access those opportunities. So if you want to do a small learning community, as Janelle is doing in her community, what are those resources that you need? And so through the A for Arizona Innovation Fund they were able to bring some of those resources to bear. But what if you're not a large organization? What if you're a family and you want to have that kind of small learning community, you know, with your school? There have been lots of conversations about, well, is it only these suburban white parents who are able to have access to those small learning communities? Yes, unless you give them resources so they can have access to the small learning communities. So there are lots of ways to do this that are not pushing kids out of the public system. You're simply giving them an opportunity to enhance their experience within the public system.
Let me go to Janelle real quick.
Yeah, let me speak to that as a parent, in our community. All of that sounds really great. I just want you to know it sounds great. It's great ideology. The problem is that in reality, a lot of our parents, and this is what Stephanie was saying, a lot of our parents in our low income areas and our communities of color don't even understand what that access looks like. They don't understand how to go about it. No one sat down with them. They have oftentimes left out of the policy decision-making process when we're making these policies. So, you know, this sounds great, but when I'm not at the table to explain to you how that would work best for me and for my community, then it's you saying, this is how you do it. This is what's best for you.
And I want to ask
why it continues to benefit families that are in our wider, more affluent areas than it does for our families. And so, you know, because I am connected and because we are an organization that stays focused, we read, we stay engaged, it makes it easier for us. But our problem is that a lot of our parents don't understand it. They don't know it's there. And they're like everyone says, they got to go to work.
So Janelle, let me ask you about the small learning community that you're doing. What has been the experience on? I want to also, what has it given, you know, the African American community, for example, through what you're doing, through the small learning environment?
So we're just going to start it, which is awesome. We just got the grant. But what appealed to us is that because we have so many families right now in South Phoenix that have single parent homes where those individuals must go to work. And some of them have been granted grace to be able to stay home, but they have to go back to work. They cannot continue on in this vein. So we decided it would be best for our organization to step in and provide them these safe spaces for their children in a smaller environment so those children can come together, so they can get the help they need, and so their parents can go back to work. I like the model that we were able to review, which was Prenda. I went through their training. We've searched them out, and they are going to be a good answer for a lot of our parents at this particular time. At this particular time, our parents need a smaller space for their children. They need a space where it's like 10, no more than 10, socially distanced, and they have someone to lead them through their learning, and they can learn empowered. It's an empowered learning environment where these children get engaged in their learning. One of the things that we've seen, Luigi, is that a lot of our young people, especially in our community, have not been engaged. And we want our children engaged. We want them empowered. We want them to know that they have a responsibility for their education, and their parents are now connected because now they're a part of that conversation with the learning guide, with the student, and we're all working together to make sure that child gets what they need. So I'm really excited about this.
Thank you, Janelle. So let me go to Stephanie really quick because I think Stephanie had something to say. And then after that one, I think we're going to move on to the next idea. And I'm gonna ask Emily Ann because I think the next idea is something that she might be really interested in.
Yeah, I think Janelle covered it.
Stephanie, are you on mute?
No, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay,
yep,
sorry. I think Janelle covered it. You know, for us, the issue is that when policy decisions are being made without the community at the table, without communities most impacted by inequity at the table, that is why our system was riddled with inequity before and will continue to be riddled with inequity if we move forward, if we don't learn our lesson and include Latinos, African Americans, Native communities at the table, because we are the communities that have been impacted by inequity the most in this state and across the country. And so our voice needs to be at the table when we're talking about policy and when we're talking about our communities.
So Emily Ann, do you have, before I ask you about the next idea that's out there, do you have anything to add to this particular proposal or this particular idea that we just went through?
Yeah, I do think we need to myth bust this notion that small school and like small learning communities are only for privileged families. We're seeing a huge spike in rural and remote communities embracing this model of schooling that is still for public students. And also in our tribal communities. There's a great micro school in San Carlos. Small learning communities have popped up in Payson and Yuma, Kingman, Lake Havasu City, Show Low. And so I think it's just really important that we level set that this is not just for one type of parents and families. The Prenda model that Janelle referenced, they've seen 1,000+ students enroll in these public school options in these smaller micro settings and these pods and learning communities. They're still public school students. They're still held to that same academic bar. And I just think it's important that we embrace the fact that this is across families, across the state, across geographic boundaries, where people are embracing this choice and to acknowledge that.
So like, flesh out for me, what is a learning pod? How does that, what is that structure? How does that look like exactly?
I'm going to tee this one to Becky.
Okay, all right, Becky, go ahead.
Her niche.
Sure. You know, we all get caught up in definitions in our work, but we could call it a pod or a hub or a micro school. These are small communities of kids and, you know, families who right now during the pandemic especially already have a relationship. They're neighbors, they're family members, they're schoolmates, and they've already spending time together. And they form what are generally around 8 to 12 kids to a pod. And they're learning together, but they're learning at home. So it's really a hybrid. It's a much smaller model of the classroom model. And instead of learning just online at home by yourself, you're still learning at home, but you're learning with the community of kids and other parents who are able to have that social experience, who are able to have that academic or intellectual engagement with each other. And it brings that energy and, you know, that component, that in-person component that so many kids and families want and need. And, you know, a lot of parents and kids love it because it's easier to customize what a child might need, both from the social emotional aspect, but also from the academic aspect of, you know, I'm not really catching this reading lesson. I need a little more time, but this student can go ahead and move faster. I really love history or I really love science, so I get to spend a little bit more time on those lessons. And so all it's saying is it's a smaller community. And right now, sometimes those communities are at home, but we also see public schools providing those smaller learning communities at childcare or at the Boys and Girls Club or in a very small space on their own campus. And so to Emily's point about, you know, quit letting the culture wars like influence your thinking about what all this means. These are mostly public school funded pods with a lot of family funded pods. And where you don't have a public school who's willing to fund your pod and you're not a family who can afford it, we need to bring these resources to bear for those families who want it, or else this idea that only some kids have access to options is going to be a self-fulfilling.
So let me go to the idea of individualized learning. What is individualized learning exactly? And how do you scale individualized learning? And I ask the questions because, you know, obviously if we can have a 1-to-1 ratio, you know, but we don't have a 1-to-1 ratio, and we cannot have, we don't even have enough teachers, for example, and we have very large school districts, for example. And so what is individualized learning, and how do you go about actually how do you go about making it happen? Emily Ann, you want to jump on this one?
Sure. So we've seen great success this spring where folks have rethought through traditional roles of teaching. So a lot of schools have embraced having sort of their best master teacher lead sort of larger sessions with students, small groups, one-on-ones that are based on skills with students as they go. You've got a great model in South Phoenix International Academy, that really customizes each day the student's learning experience. Again, as was pointed out, like with the pods and smaller learning communities, as you demonstrate mastery with the help of technology, you're able to advance forward. You're able to take more time to deepen that skill, build back competencies that may have been missed. You also are seeing it in rural communities like Congress Elementary School. They really are focused on that individualized experience. You still get that holistic social and emotional support with peers around sort of your same grade bands of sorts. But they're really trying to rethink with the advancement of technology, tools like the Guru Navigator is one of them, where it really is outlining this pathway for students, and with the support of supplemental apps and sort of rethinking that role of teachers as more like guides and facilitators. It's really leading to empowered learners that have this agency and are driving and invested in where they've fallen behind and where they need to catch up to be successful.
Thank you, Amelia. Let me go to Stephanie. Stephanie, what do you're part of Phoenix Union, it's a big school district. If we're going to explore the idea of individualized learning, how do you scale that one up? How do you try and implement that in a district like yours?
Yeah, so I mean, we 100% believe in flexibility at Phoenix Union. It is the reason why we have been recognized as one of the most innovative high school systems. Our portfolio is over 20 high schools now. We have micro schools, we have small schools, we have specialty programs, we have comprehensive campuses, but we also have 28,000 students, right? And so when you talk about these individualized learning plans, it takes time and resources. And that's often the barrier for a lot of systems, especially urban and rural systems that have high populations of students. And so I think for us, it's getting creative about how we offer supports to our teachers in this time right now. And when we transition to distance learning in the spring, one of the things we talk to our employees about is that all of us are educators, from the food service workers to our maintenance staff to transportation, et cetera. Everyone at the district is an educator. And so we all have a responsibility to provide that individual connection with students and families, because oftentimes, I'm already hearing stories, not just in Phoenix Union, but even in our partner districts, of kids being depressed right now, having social and emotional challenges because they are not just disconnected from their friends and their school community, they're even disconnected from their family units. Just yesterday, I heard a story of a student or parents, as essential workers, being scared to interact with their kids because they don't want to expose their kids to a virus that they are putting themselves at risk of every single day and having to work. And so those family dynamics, I think we have to be mindful of, and how we support families going forward. And so that to me is the struggle that a system as large as ours will have going forward.
Janelle, let me go to you.
I want to say something.
Go ahead, ma'am.
So, to piggyback on that, with the larger school districts and the smaller pod model, and having enough resources, there are grandparents out there, there are great grandparents out there, there are retired teachers out there that are willing to get back involved, that want to be engaged. We could distribute them throughout the district. Get them up and running, educated, background check, fingerprinted, whatever you need to do, and welcome them in to these pods or these micro schools within the public school, where now you have the resources you need. They're all over the community. And those individuals would welcome the opportunity to be a part of this type of innovation, because they want to see their children learn, and they want to make sure their child gets the education that particular child needs in order for them to be successful. So I'm really encouraging a lot of our districts who are they got to think outside the box. You have the resources. You have people in your community that have either been retired teachers, because I've talked to many of them. They're willing to get back in here and do their job. They're already receiving retirement, so it's not about a money thing. It's about I want to give back thing. And I want to make sure our next generations are prepared. And so I believe we need to utilize our community. We need to utilize those grandparents and those parents that can be at school for certain periods of time. Let's get their schedule. Some parents can do that for a few hours a day to come and be a part of that. It's just thinking outside of the box and opening it up for your community to come together. It does take a village. It takes a village to educate and to take care of our children. We just
Can I jump in here quickly?
And Luigi,
we've also seen this in
Emilian.
like Tennessee, where they're leveraging the service corps with their young people, folks who have deferred from college, alumni from that, recent alumni from that high school, come to be tutors and really engaging even on a part-time basis. We're seeing this in Maryvale with Western School of Science and Technology, where they're embracing alums to help give that wraparound support in after hours schooling to their current students. So we're seeing creative.
Emily,
I just wanted to piggyback on what Stephanie and Janelle said. I mean, this piece about parent and student engagement, you can't have individualized learning without the student being engaged in their learning and having an opportunity for the family to be present, not just at parent-teacher conferences, but totally embedded in the educational experience and knowledgeable about the educational experience that their child is having. And so the way, you know, Janelle's bringing the community into the school, and the way All in Education through Stephanie's work is educating parents on how to be a co-educator with their school. This is incredibly important for how you ultimately get to that idealized, individualized education experience.
So let me ask you about one other idea, which is projects-based learning. Right? So explain to me what is projects-based learning. And I don't know if Emily want to jump on this one, or and also I want to, and later on I want to ask Stephanie if you know, for again the same question, right? For a bigger school district, how do you kind of implement the idea of a projects-based learning? And really, what is projects-based learning, and how does that improve the way we educate our kids?
I'm happy to jump in. You know, we have a lot of research now and data that's showing that this leads to greater student engagement. It helps our students to be able to apply the content that they've learned. It can be like physical building of items, right? Especially in the career areas. We're seeing that, for example, in Fort Mojave with the Arizona Business and Industry High School, where they're really having students much more engaged, leading to certifications by applying the content they're learning online into hands-on experiences. You're seeing this right now, a lot of schools thinking ahead to sending home manipulatives and materials so that kids can apply what they're learning, again, through online modules and such, into building projects, applications, reports, delivery, lots of research supporting that when students are then teaching others and applying it, they're invested because they see why it really matters into the real world. And so we've seen schools take advanced math classes, for example, and end up building bleachers and school equipment and using power tools and partnering with community builders. And so now they take those live project experiences that they were doing in person pre-COVID into home kits and personalized experiences for students.
Stephanie, so let me ask you, what are your thoughts on project-based learning? Have you tried it, and what has been your experience so far?
Project-based learning is great. It's a great way for kids to learn. We have schools that are centered around this concept. Our Coding Academy, Bioscience, etc. are perfect examples of that. But on a comprehensive campus, the academies of South Mountain was flipped into an academies model, really to try and scale this concept of applied learning at the local level. And so when you look at South, you know, we have different academies within the community. So there's one that's, you know, focused on social justice. We have a performing arts academy. Math and Science Academy, et cetera. So these different academies allow students not just to explore content, but to really take on these applied learning projects and opportunities. So it's a great approach, and we fully support it.
Let me ask you about the idea of an advisory model. And I think, Emily Ann, this is something that you've looked at. What it is in, what is the structure of a, well, let me just ask you, what is an advisory model?
You're giving me all the big ones. So what we've seen from schools, especially this spring, is taking on a meaningful approach, leveraging their amazing school counselors and teachers, having a standing touch point. Sometimes it's later in the day, sometimes it's the beginning of the day, where they're one experience with students or a small group of students, and being able to check in not just on academics and what's to come for the day, but how they're doing emotionally, how's home life, what needs they have going ahead. Some of our schools do this daily, some it's a few touch points a week, but really have seen great spikes. Congratulate Phoenix Union for really leading the way this spring. Obviously Stephanie can touch more, but they got great national kudos as they deserved for really leading the way on one-on-one touch points with all their students that other schools have since replicated and followed. So
Becky, I want to go to you. You know, we have a couple ideas that we went through, right? Individualized learning, small learning communities or pods. We talk about the idea of you know, providing funding resources directly to families. From a public policy standpoint, what are the barriers to allowing the schools to explore these options, and how do you go about you know, overcoming those barriers?
Earlier in this conversation, Emily Ann made a point that we're really in a good place as a state. We have much more opportunity here for our local neighborhood schools to innovate and for parents to make choices within both the public system and outside of the public system. I think where we really need to provide some improvement is when we say we want parents to engage and then they come to our school system with ideas or things that they want or need. We need to figure out a way to say yes and not no, right? So we know, getting back to the point about small learning communities, kids are already learning from home. Why can't we help them congregate those kids into small learning communities if they want to, and let teachers who want to go be part of that pod or micro school from your public school district do it? So what are some ways that we can use the flexibilities we already have in the system to say yes to parents who are asking for things we might not already be doing? The other thing that I think we need to do is, if we think back on some of what I would call like our very first reforms, like open enrollment, Stephanie and I have both mentioned that we have these highly segregated school systems because of the way we used to, you know, push out Black businesses or white flight or draw lines around communities that we didn't want to be a part of, you know, 100, 200 years ago. And we need to do away with those, right? We need to say there aren't boundaries, there aren't borders. You can go access the education you want wherever you want. And even though we're further ahead than some states in doing that, we are not all the way there because we are so advanced. We've kind of rested on our laurels in that regard. And I think we need to do more to make it easier for, you know, if you have a child who wants to take one class from Phoenix Union, make it easier for them to do that. Some districts won't let their kids access one class from another school district. You have to do everything within that framework. And I know there's so much to talk about here.
I'm sorry, Becky, let me hone in on that one. When you say,
yes,
you know, you have to work within the school district framework, and students not able to access another district's programs, for example, that's the way our system is built. That's the way we structure our system, right? The thing that pops up in my mind is that, you know, it's kind of, with online learning, you can learn from anywhere. You know, programs, education materials are kind of available to you. Some of them are free, and a lot of them are free, and some are paid, for example. So what you're saying is that if there's a student, let's say in Stephanie's district, who, or say in my district, who wants to go and maybe learn a program from Stephanie's district, then allow that student to then get a credit for that? Is that what you have in mind?
Exactly. So some schools won't take credits from these either out of school experiences or other school district experiences. So if you do a really cool like STEM experience over the summer, or you take a coding academy class, is your school going to actually give you credit for it? And relatedly, is there a cost for it? So those are some of the things that we can rethink in looking at how kids move across the system, talking again right now just about the public system to keep it within the boundaries of that model that I know a lot of folks would like to keep this conversation in. Even within the public school system, we can still create a lot of flexibility for kids and for parents. And we're seeing that happen because of the pandemic. One, because of the cool models you see places like Phoenix Union happening, but also because of the brutal realities that we see on the ground for families. So we hope some of these innovations, if you will, these accommodations for kids and families continue. And that would be around these ideas for project-based learning. It would be around the ideas where not every kid's pace has to be exactly the same. And to Western schools of technology, for older siblings who are taking care of their younger siblings and have to do their learning later in the day, make sure we're providing an opportunity for that to happen. So there's a lot of flexibility we already have. We just have to take maximum advantage of it.
Let's go to some of the audience questions. I've seen some very interesting ones. One of them made me chuckle a little bit. So it says here from Janelle, do you think we might be able to use all of this as an opportunity to kill standardized testing? And then his comment is, or her comment is, what a waste of money and instructional time and for no gain. Let me go to Stephanie. What are your thoughts on not having or completely eliminating standardized testing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we definitely want some form of accountability, right, to make sure that students are continuing to learn. But honestly, standardized testing has been, it has created a system where we slap letter grades on schools, and typically that's correlated again with low income communities of color. And so if you look at what how our accountability system is designed, it's very inequitable, and now we are making decisions. You have superintendents and principals who make decisions based on test scores, and so that level of high stakes pressure has created a system where we don't focus on individualized instruction and learning and creating these supportive learning environments for our students and their families, because we are so focused on what the letter grade is going to be that is slapped on our school and our district community.
Let me ask Janelle this question. All these resources are great. This is from David. However, education begins at home. How about parent training with the school and teachers to enable them to assist and encourage their children? And I guess especially in this prolonged pandemic environment, right? When some of the schools already started last week, and most of them started it online. And so parents are kind of have to navigate how to exactly help their students, even as they may be working full-time themselves. Janelle, go ahead, ma'am.
So I hope I understand the question. So how are we helping our parents get educated?
I guess more the question is that, what do you think of parent training with the school and teachers to enable them to assist and encourage their children to, I guess, be more engaged?
Absolutely. I believe that a lot of parents are intimidated right now at times by what their children are learning, because of course, many of us didn't learn this way. And so I do believe there needs to be someone that is put in place to help the parent and give them some education as well on how to properly navigate through not only the systems, because many parents have the technological challenges, as well as understanding the materials that their children are supposed to do. And I think what our challenge was initially was parents said they were getting all this stuff thrown at them, and they didn't even know how to help their child work through it because there was very little instruction. And the parent, I believe we need to empower our parents so that they can be more visible in their child's education process, because again, the parent is the first educator of the child, and to give that parent back the tools that they need in order to do that, like we said earlier, be a co-educator, a co-collaborator with the educator for their child, and that they all work together. So I believe we do need to build up those parents' information base and their knowledge base on how to properly help their children. Absolutely. And the schools need to provide that. I believe the districts need to provide a way. And I know Stephanie had said something about that. I don't think we talked about it today, but I know Phoenix Union is leading the way on this parent educator type model.
So here's I think we're almost out of time here, but here's one question. How do you recommend a student or parents reach out, and what can be done if they believe they are being set up to fail by the school? And I guess I think really that's kind of like the crux of the discussion, right? So let's just go around the table and let me get your thoughts. And let me start with Becky here.
Well, this is a tough one because it depends on your family situation, right? So if you're not happy with the experience you're having and you need a new one, how can we make sure that you have access to a different learning experience? Is it easy for you to open a role in a better or neighboring school district or charter school? Do you have the resources to provide some of filling the gap that you're not getting from the educational experience? If you are afraid to send your kid to an in-person experience in the classroom, can we get you the resources either through a partnership with your public school or through micro grants so you can go find that experience rather than being forced to pick one that's not good for you? So I think we need to make it clear to parents, to Janelle and Stephanie's point, what are the menu of things that they can access to be more empowered as parents? And we need much more transparency around that. We need a lot more transparency about what the tools are in the tool chest for parents to improve the poor experience their kids are having, if that's the issue per the question.
Emily Ann, your thoughts, ma'am?
Yeah, number one, for our school leaders, double check your parent experience on your websites. If it takes more than a few clicks to get to information, especially enrollment, that's not user friendly. I also want to say how excited I am that we have Power coming to Tucson, organizations like Love Our School that now can just be that neutral source of information so that parents are aware of, here are some options in case the one that you're currently in isn't the right fit for that individual.
Emily Ann, you cut there at just the last second. Can you repeat your last sentence?
Yes, sorry about that. I'm excited about having Families Empowered come to Tucson and organizations like Love Our School and Choose a School in Arizona to be that neutral resource for parents, where they realize that a particular model they thought was the right fit for their unique child and their family might not be working anymore, and just so that they are aware of all of their options, including a lot of the great public district, magnet, and charter schools.
Stephanie, your thoughts, ma'am?
Yeah, so I think, the reason why All In Education came to exist is because we really need our community to get involved and really to be advocates for their students and for their families. And so I often say, I think our Latino community can be trusting of institutions almost to a fault. We send our kids to school and no questions asked. And we want parents to ask questions. We want parents to be involved. I love when parents show up to board meetings because it means that you're holding us accountable to ensuring that we're providing the best education to the students and families that we serve. And so I think if parents can be invited into the process and really be viewed as partners in how we support our students going forward, it will make the quality of our education system just that much better.
And Janelle, I guess you have the last word, ma'am.
The last word? Oh, this is awesome. So I concur with everything that the ladies said, and I just want to piggyback on the fact that our parents need to know what questions to ask. That oftentimes in our work, we have to help them understand that they have a right, and their children have a right to a good education, and they have a right to ask any question they need to ask of the educator. Again, oftentimes they don't feel welcome to do that. And so we have got to do a better job of that. And I believe this pandemic has brought the parent back into their rightful place to be involved in their child's education. So let's not lose that. let's continue on this train, because the old way of doing school is done. We're outdated. We're in a whole new season. And now it's the co-educator model, parent, teacher, student as well. They need to be a part of their own educational experience. So I think that is where we're at today. And that is the future of our education.
I want to thank Stephanie, Emily Ann, Janelle, and Becky for joining us this morning. We went through a whole lot of ideas. My takeaway is that people that who watch and who listen can take some of these ideas and explore them and see where it leads. And I want to thank again, yes, Every Kid for sponsoring this morning's discussion. I myself as a parent learned a lot. And so thank you, everybody. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
All righty. Bye for now.